Now, as you were going through those 4 diagrams, did you see stuff that came to your own mind that you could add to it? Okay, so we're not presenting a system, a clear-cut system. What we're doing is saying that we need a beginning place. With every departing, there's a leaving. You have to have a place where you depart before you can leave. You have to show people where they're at. And you'll see that when you're talking to a person or talking to a crowd, the Lord will make a different emphasis through the material, and you'll just see it begin to flow and develop through there. But the main thing for me is that you see it from your own perspective, from your own eyes, your own foundation. The way I used to do lecture training is that I would give the lecture, the points that I would give, and you had to sound exactly like me. And then when you got all done with that, you had to shift it into you. Well, we're cutting out a step. And we're just saying, no, let's just shift it to how you see it and how it's usable for you, and God using your own uniqueness. We look at man. Man's made out of the dust of the earth. God breathes His Spirit into him. You become a living soul with mind, will, and emotions. The day they eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they died. And now they look to other people for their source and to meet their deepest needs. And we're completely self-centered. All religion is an attempt to get those deep needs met from something outside of you and to work its way on the inside. And often we've made another person the source of our religion because we want them to meet our deepest needs. We have a vacuum that only God can fill, and the more you try to fill it, the more empty you'll feel. And you'll keep trying and trying and trying. But if He could fill you, then you would find yourself full and these things would drop off naturally. Now, the second thing that's wrong, being born dead to God in the Spirit, and we're going to be talking about 3 things that are wrong. Being born dead to God in the Spirit. The first thing is self-centeredness. The second thing that is wrong is my mind, will, and emotions were created to be under the influence of God. And that is sanity. When my mind, will, and emotions are not in touch with God, that's insanity. Everyone is born insane. And what is the point of saying that everyone is born insane? Because most of us have never judged our thoughts or our emotions or our will. When you have a thought, is it God's thought, Satan's thought, or your conscience? Where does the thought come from? And Satan will always speak to you in a first-person, singular voice with your accent. He won't walk up to you and say you're a failure. He'll stand behind you in a voice that sounds like yours and say that you're a failure. And he would like me to start obsessing on whatever he's saying to me. There's 2 types of people that deal with sheep, shepherds and butchers. The shepherd's voice is light and life and liberty and freeing. The butcher's voice is harsh and critical and driving and condemning. Whose voice are you listening to when it comes to your thoughts? And then if you don't judge your thoughts, you probably don't judge your emotions. And here's an interesting thing about emotions. The source of the emotion can be true, or the source of the emotion can be false, and it feels exactly the same way. True guilt and false guilt feel exactly the same way. I'm born dead to God in the Spirit. I'm self-centered, and the second thing is I'm insane. My mind, will, and emotions were created to be under His influence. They're not under His influence. Therefore, we don't judge our thoughts, and we don't judge our emotions. How much of what you're thinking is real? How much of what you're feeling is real? And so we want to look at lying thoughts and lying emotions in your life. Okay, now write out a sentence. What did you hear? In this diagram, what do you see? What comes to mind? And what would you want to communicate? Yes, Ann?
We need to understand and judge where our thoughts and emotions come from. Are they from God the shepherd or from Satan the butcher?
Good. Great. If you have everything pertaining to life and godliness, you've got to be better off than you feel you are.
Amen.
And you have to be better off than you think that you are. And so the enemy's just hammering away at us to tell us how bad things really are. Here's something you can always do to an emotion or a thought. You have a thought that, this is hopeless and God doesn't love you or whatever. I always just stop and say to that thought, who's Jesus? Who is he? And when you hear a long pause and a big lag, and you never hear the affirmative, because if your thoughts are from him, right away, even in your thoughts, even in the deepest part of your spirit, you'll give the good witness that he's the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's who he is. I've got some good friends in Oklahoma, and she was contemplating suicide for years, and none of us knew it. And she contemplated it and contemplated and contemplated, and finally one day, she decides to kill herself. And she has it all lined out exactly how she'll do it. And she's just ready to kill herself after her husband left for work and he forgot something and came back. And she said she sees him come back in and she's looking out the curtain at him and she has this thought, we'll wait until he leaves. And she said it was then she said, we? Who's we? Who's we? We'll wait till he leaves? Who's we? And then it's the first time she'd ever judged her thoughts or her emotions and said that can't be God. God is light and life and liberty and free. And and the enemy just hammers away and hammers away and hammers away. And what we're trying to say in this is the second problem is you don't judge your thoughts or emotions, and is it possible that you might be wrong about what you're thinking and that you might be wrong about what you're feeling? Do you know it's very important when you lecture or you counsel people that sometimes you let the defeated live on your faith? You let them live on your hope? And you sit there and say, look, you're better off than you think or feel you are. I'm telling you that you are. You may not believe it, but believe me. Because I've been there, I've seen that, I know you're better off, I know where you're moving, this is how the enemy works. You talk about those kind of things. But what we're saying here is the second problem is you don't judge thoughts and you don't judge emotions. See, when you go through the lectures, if you have the point of the diagram, you can add an illustration that's your own. The one time I was thinking this or one time I was feeling this. But people are controlled by guilt and by an event in the past for years. And it's a real secret to forget what's behind you and press on. And here's the other thing. What's the option if you don't? I mean, there is no option. Well, the one thing about God, when he speaks, he doesn't give you options. That's just basically it. Either you deny it and go on. So the first thing we're saying here in this diagram is you need to judge your thoughts and emotions. They may not be real. I've had false thoughts and I've had false emotions, and here's a couple examples of those. So what are you hearing? The next thing then, you can have mental then and emotional obsessions. And an obsession is when you pick something up, and you see we have it over here in the corner. It's when you pick something up that isn't very big and you move it all the way here and it becomes an obsession. And so a lot of people are obsessed with a thought or they're obsessed with a feeling. And you can't get free from it because it's your total obsession. You know, we talk about this and we're not, we're not lecturing this, but in your brain with neuron pathways, all you have to do is do something a couple of times for 30 days and you have a pathway in your brain that tells you to do it. So I learned at some point how to put on glasses. And now that I've learned how to put them on, I have a neuron pathway that I don't even have to think about it. I just close my eyes and they're right where I want them. Perfect. Well, if you sit there and think about a negative thing twice a day for 30 days, you have a pathway that craves to be fed. And we get to the place where we can't go to sleep at night until we replay and feed that pathway. So I lay in bed and I start making a case against those that have offended me and hurt me. And they've done this and they've done that, and I go all the way through it. And do you know it's really funny, because when you get all done, there's this sick feeling of being fed and satisfaction, and now you're a glutton and you can go to bed because you fed that pathway in you. And some of us end up with the pathways that I can't go to bed at night until I recite to myself every failure that I've ever had. and I'm worthless and I'm a failure and I'm stupid and I should have done this and I should have done that. No, I'm so embarrassed about that. And we go through it and we feed those pathways. Well, it becomes my obsession. It's all I'm thinking about. You'll be counseling people sometimes that their problem is not the problem. Their addiction to obsession is the problem. It's obsession, just the thing of obsession that's really the issue. Because what they're doing is they're just chanting about their problem, and you're trying to answer their problem. But I don't feel close to God. I don't feel close to God. Yeah, but He's not there. He's not there. When I pray, nothing happens. God isn't there. He isn't there. And so you're trying to convince Him that God's there, but that's not the issue. He's learned to cope with obsession. And so he's obsessing on it. The obsession's the issue. If you fix that answer, you'd have to find a new obsession. This guy I met said that he didn't want to marry his wife because he didn't feel love. And now what do you do that you're married and you don't feel love? And that's all he would talk about, is not feeling love. In the end, I said, love has nothing to do with it. If you'll look back through your life, you've always had something to obsess on to avoid life. And now this feeling of not having love is your new obsession. And I said, I'm not feeding it. I'm not talking about your wife anymore. I'm not going to do that. You're obsessive. So being born dead to God in the Spirit, self-centered and insane, and I don't judge my thoughts or emotions. And since I don't judge them, I take something and move it up here, and it becomes the focus of my whole life. And I'm obsessed. And you'll be talking to people all the time that can relate to obsession. Okay, what does that diagram say to you?
When I don't judge my thoughts and emotions, I obsess on things that aren't true or are not so big an issue, and they become all I can see.
Yeah. Do you know you'll become defined by your obsession? I've said to a few of my friends that struggle with homosexuality, are you really telling me this is all you are? That you're defined by this, that this is all your life consists of, that that's it? I just said, I refuse to let you be defined by that. But that's all they're seeing. There's 7 billion people on the planet, and they've all made it through today, generally. And so I'm sitting there and I can't make it through today because of this thing. I mean, that just can't be possible. But when you're lecturing or you're counseling, that is everything for the person. They don't see how they can get through today. And it's just us subtly through the lectures moving Christ back here. And all of a sudden you'll see the relief on the audience or the people or the group. It's an absolute truth that when He's the focus and this moves back, it just isn't as big as it used to be. It's not as huge. I'll tell someone who's been molested or abused, it's bad enough that it happened, but the word worship means to give your attention to, so you continue to worship the person that hurt you, and that makes it a tragedy. So let's kill it. Let's get on, because you don't want to keep worshiping that, and that's what happens at this point. Some event, something that takes place in my life. All right, so we go back here. These branches are problems that I have, but there's root issues. I want to look at the root issue. You're born with spirit, soul, and body, dead to God in the Spirit. You look to other people to meet your deepest needs, and you're completely self-centered because all that matters is you, and you've become religious. You look for things from the outside to meet the need on the inside. Nothing's going to fill the gap except Christ in you. The second problem you have is being born dead to God in the Spirit, is you're insane. Your mind, will, and emotions aren't in touch with reality, and you need to judge your thoughts and your feelings. I can promise you're better off than you think you are today, and you're better off than you feel you are today. When you're cut off from Him in the Spirit, you begin to obsess on things. You have a huge obsession, and you believe this is the biggest issue in your life right now. And so I understand why you have it there, but it's not the biggest thing. It becomes the obsession. The third problem that we have is that in our self-centered, insane condition, I don't know who I am. Now, when you look at the diagrams, never let the diagram work you, you work it. It doesn't have rule over you, you have rule over it. And in the diagrams that look a little more complex, all you have to do is start working through the diagram. Just look at it, and you fill in the blanks while you're lecturing. So in this circle, I'm going to put the impression I would like to leave a room full of people. What do I want you to think about me? What do I want you to see? So I put in there, I want to be loving and I want to be kind and spiritual and all those kind of things. Then you just move to the next part of the diagram, and the next part is, but how do you describe yourself at your worst? Well, at my very worst, when I'm laying in bed at night and nothing's going on, the enemy's beating me up and he's whispering and telling me I'm hopeless and useless and all those kind of things, and I'm unlovable. Now, when I'm like this, I'm controlled by people on the positive, and I'm also controlled by people on the negative. If somebody says I'm this, they can manipulate me. If people say I'm this in the negative, they can manipulate me. So I'm constantly being manipulated by other people. How did I come to get this image of myself, my identity at my worst? What happened in my life? And so there were events that took place. You might have been abandoned. There might have been a divorce in the family. You might have had a physical deformity. You might have had to move a lot. There's a lot of things you do that have given you a message about yourself. So right now we're not looking at those messages, but we're saying you did get messages, overt or covert messages. And a overt message is an obvious message, I don't like you. A covert message is, I just abandon you. Either way, you get the message that I didn't like you. So in this diagram, we want to look at the third problem, and the third problem is, I don't know who I am. In my self-centered, insane condition, I let other self-centered, insane people give me a message about myself. And now I have this negative message, and I spend my life trying to cover it up. And so I'm going to treat people this way. So you go through the diagram. In my self-centered, insane condition, I let other people tell me who I am, and I'm trying to change it. This is a desire, impression that I want to leave because I don't like what I feel. And again, as Adam and Eve in the garden covered themselves, every day I have to cover myself. I've got to pick out my clothes. What happened in your life? What kind of messages did you get from self-centered, insane people that gave you this negative image that you needed to cover up, and now it allows other people to manipulate you? So we're looking at 3 areas: self-centered, insane, a controlled image. All right, write that out in a little sentence. Okay, Ann?
Sounds kind of funny. I want to be, and yet I'm not, because I'm only what others have told me I am.
Great. Now, do you see in lecturing and in counseling, what we're doing is the person's come in with the main problem, the presenting issue. And everyone in the audience or the Sunday school class or your small group believes they know what the problem is. And what we're trying to say is, no, there's a deeper problem behind all of this. And if we could resolve that, I think we can go back to the problem with a different approach. Because here's the thing, we go back to saying, here's an orange, and if you squeeze it, out comes all this black stuff, but you thought orange juice would come? Well, when you're squeezed and all this comes out of you, you'd rather talk about who squeezes you than what came out. Well, what we're trying to do is say, no, let's look at what's coming out of you and why it's coming out of you. Because we're really not into problem resolution. We're into Christ, and we believe He'll resolve your problems. Because problem resolution never ends. And so how does God work in all of this for you? And that's what we want to present to a person. You'll be able to fill in all the blanks once you get the flow and you see the diagram. And you'll put in your own illustrations. You'll begin to look at that and be able to share that.